I live in a pretty affluent neighborhood due to getting a decent inheritance from my parents. I got their house and some money, which would have been more than enough for me to live on for quite a while. Even though I didn't make a lot of money, working as an adjunct professor at a nearby community college, I really enjoyed the work. Because of this, even though I technically didn't need to work right now, I still continued to do so. I mention this because I was a bit out of place in this neighborhood. I was unmarried and I didn't have any kids either. Along with that, I worked a job where I sometimes had to deal with some unruly and immature children. All these things together made it so that if someone were to try and do something to me, it really could have been any number of people. I had gotten home from work around dusk one day. It was my favorite day of the week because I didn't have any night classes to teach. The sun was almost all the way down when I arrived home, but not quite there yet. It was going to be trash day the following morning, so I went into the garage to get the cans ready to take out to the street. When I brought the cans outside, though, I noticed someone walking on the other side. I didn't really know my neighbors too well, so I didn't know who this was exactly. While I was taking out the garbage, I began to have this really weird feeling. I'm sure every single one of you reading this has had it before. You feel like someone is looking at you, even though you have no reason to really think they are. The feeling was so intense though, I just had to look up and see what was going on. The guy who I'd seen walking across the street was walking very slowly now, and he seemed to be staring over in my direction. As soon as he caught me looking at him though, he looked away right away. Afterward, he began walking faster down the street. I didn't really think that much about it. That sort of thing happens all the time. I finished placing the garbage and recycling cans in their proper places and went back into my home. After that, I remember fixing myself a drink. If you've ever been a community college teacher, you know exactly why. Sometimes when you're grading some papers, the only thing that keeps you from fearing for the future of humanity is having a solid drink. Oh, by the way, I taught English 1 and 102 specifically, so that gives you a bit of an idea of what I had to deal with. After about an hour of grading these papers, I decided to go prepare something for dinner. As I was coming back to my seat in the front room though, I just happened to look out the front window. There was a street lamp right across the street from my house. I noticed a figure standing in the shadows just to the side of the direct light. I had to squint a bit to even see if someone was actually there though. When I did, I could have sworn I saw them moving further away from the light. I thought about that guy I'd seen earlier that had been looking at me. Now I was mildly concerned. I didn't really think though that someone was out there targeting me or even aware of my presence in any way. Instead, I thought maybe someone was out there planning to break into one of my neighbors' houses or something. It was merely a passing thought though. Sometimes I knew I could let my imagination get away from me. I tried not to concern myself too much. I had some dinner and continued grading papers. I didn't see anything else strange the few times I'd gotten up and checked again. I did keep looking out the window though, just in case this figure actually was someone shady. There was one time I thought I might have seen someone skulking about, but I couldn't be completely sure. By the time I ended up going to bed that night, I had all but forgotten about seeing that figure outside. Later on though, I woke up in the middle of the night, breathless and completely unaware of what was going on. All I knew was that I woke up in shock in bed and couldn't breathe for some reason. After my head started to quickly clear up, I realized someone was in my room and they had their hands over my nose and mouth and were trying to smother me. I bucked and struggled, but you have to know how hard it is when you can't breathe. I went into full-on panic mode. Something occurred to me in that moment. If this person was trying to kill me, maybe I should just act like I was dead. So I went limp, rolled my eyes, and held my chest still, holding my breath and not struggling anymore. I pretended to be dead. This person still held their hand over my face for a few more seconds, but after they removed them, I did my best not to breathe and to make them think I was truly dead. The person stood up for a moment and looked over at me. Then he turned and walked out the door, not even bothering to check my pulse. I was shocked, but I began to take short little breaths until I was sure he was far enough away. Then I really pulled in the freaking air. I was scared, but I got up. I was hurting from the smothering, but I was determined to get this guy. Unfortunately, he left the house and got away before I could catch up to him. Instead of trying to follow him, I called 911. I can't really think of why anyone would try to kill me. To this day, I have no idea who he was or why he tried to do it at all. Fortunately, I never had any other attempts on my life, but that also keeps me from having any idea why this could have possibly happened. When I was about 14 years old, my parents began letting me stay home by myself. At first, it was only times when they would go out to eat or something of that sort. It was nice to have a few hours in the house by myself, but when I proved to them that I was able to stay home alone without any problems, this amount of time definitely increased over time. When I was 15 years old, I actually got to stay home by myself over a 4-day weekend. My parents wanted to go on a holiday cruise. They hadn't planned on going without me. I just had no interest in going at all. I wouldn't tell them this for years afterward, but being on a big ship like that in the middle of the ocean was pretty damn scary to me. Plus, it would be nice to have the house all to myself for a whole 4 days. Up to that point, 2 days had been the longest I'd ever been allowed to be by myself. I had the best plans for the time I was going to be home, too. I was going to eat myself a ton of pizza, play a ton of video games. Actually, I think that was about it. It sure was going to be the perfect weekend, though. They left on Friday morning. I did have school on that day, and I got out of school at the normal time. Normally, my mom would pick me up and drive me home, but I was going to be walking home that day. There weren't many kids from the school who walked, so it was pretty much me, myself, and I on the way home. It was about a 30-minute walk or so through town, then through part of my neighborhood to get home. My mom was a homemaker, so this was one of the few times when I got home that I found the house completely empty. It was a really weird experience, and I have to admit it did feel a little strange at first. My dad was a doctor, so we lived in a pretty nice and big house. Being alone in such a place is always quite the experience. That night, I put my plan into motion. I ordered some pizza, grabbed myself some soda, and didn't tell my parents at all, but I nicked some drinks out of the liquor cabinet too. I settled in and played some video games until I fell asleep in my room. I didn't bother to turn on any of the lights in the house either. Whenever I had to walk around to get something or otherwise, I just walked around in the dark. I could still see where I was going because of outside lights shining in through the downstairs windows. Plus, I was playing all these horror games, and those are best to play when you keep the house nice and dark. I was wearing my headphones as I was playing too. If you play horror games, you know they're a lot more fun with the headphones in. You can hear the sounds that might be warning you of upcoming terror approaching you from behind or around a corner perhaps. It makes the situation a whole lot scarier, but that's why we enjoy it. I kept my headset on as I was walking throughout the house too, since these were wireless headphones. A few times I went and grabbed myself another drink. I didn't worry about my parents finding out about that though. They drank enough that I highly doubted they would pay attention to a tiny amount missing from their liquor cabinet. I wasn't used to drinking though, so I just kept taking these tiny little sips each time I came out. I got up and went to get myself another drink, but as I was walking back toward the steps, I had the strangest feeling wash over me. I don't know how to describe it really, just like a feeling of knowing you're not alone. I hadn't gotten such a feeling before, and I really didn't care for it. Going up the stairs, I was pretty nervous. I didn't really know why though. It was just a feeling and I didn't see anything. I tried to brush it off as nothing. It must have come out of nowhere. When I got to the top though, I don't know why I did this, but I turned to look down the stairs. When I did, I found myself staring at a large man standing right there. Someone had broken into the house. Maybe they thought it was deserted because I had all the lights off at the time. When the guy saw me looking down at him though, that's when things really got scary. The man immediately started to bolt up the stairs after me. I ran as fast as I could, trying to get into my bedroom. I was able to get there just before him and get the door closed. As I locked it shut, I immediately heard pounding and slamming on the door. I ran to my cell phone. This flimsy door was not going to hold for very long. In fact, if this guy had any sense, he'd just unlock it from the outside. It didn't matter though. I called 911. The response was pretty swift. There must have been a police car close by or something, because I heard sirens pretty much instantly. I guess the guy heard them too, because he stopped pounding on the door. I heard him running away back down the stairs. I didn't know what to do, so I went to look out the window. My window faced the backyard, and that's the way the intruder chose to get out. I watched as he jumped over the fence. Unfortunately for him though, the cops caught up to him pretty much right away and tackled him down to arrest him. They brought him by the house so I could identify him as the same man I'd seen. Even though it had been completely dark, I knew that this was him. The guy ended up going to jail after a long process, and I was pretty happy about that. What I wasn't happy about were the memories of what happened though. I mean, I was walking around the house with my headphones on, and the man was in there the entire time while I was doing this apparently. I wonder how much was going on in that house that I hadn't noticed in those moments. I wonder why he'd just been in there with me totally unaware, just hanging out the entire time. I wonder how long I really had been in danger. During the big economics boom in Japan, there were many theme and amusement parks that opened up. Unfortunately, the fierce competition between them and the following economic recession caused many of them to close back down. Very few opened up again, and those that didn't remain open for very long. I suppose that was unfortunate for business and the theme park industry, but it's left some really interesting abandoned places in Japan. I mean, exploring an old empty house is one thing, but exploring an entire park when you're the only people there is something on a whole different level. Most major parks, despite what many might think, have been demolished by the time I went exploring, so most of the ones I had been to were smaller venues that no one might have heard of before. That might be another reason why they all closed down actually, because not many people used to go to them. There's definitely a pretty high creep factor in being in those places, and I have to admit, the places can play tricks on your mind that you wouldn't believe. You always constantly feel like you're being watched, always thinking you might see something that isn't really there. And that's what the worst part is. If you really do see something, how can you really be sure it actually happened? That was the huge appeal of going to these places though. You get to freak yourself out pretty badly while remaining mostly safe. I've had my fair share of freakouts just like that. Those are all different stories though. This happened at the third abandoned theme park I decided to go and explore. It was a pretty old one. Honestly, I couldn't understand why it hadn't been torn down. I was taking a risk with the time I spent looking for it, honestly. I thought surely it must have been gone before I'd actually found it. At the entrance, I noticed something weird though. There was a board that had nails in it, with the point of the nail sticking upward. It was like the owners of the park wanted a cheap way to keep people out or something. It was easily detectable and I stepped right over it. As I kept on walking though, I tripped on what I later noticed was a tripwire and fell right on my face. I had to admit, that was pretty clever. The park itself didn't disappoint. I know it had some rides, but not a whole ton of them. There were tons of booths that had once probably sold food, merchandise, and had games to play. Everything was run down, rusted, crusty, overgrown, and wonderfully spooky. It didn't take long for the creep factor to really set in, and that feeling of being watched came over me pretty quickly. In fact, I began to get pretty paranoid. That was perfectly normal, though. As I continued walking, though, I was sure I'd just seen someone out of the corner of my eye hiding behind something. I turned swiftly to look and see if anyone was there, but when I didn't see anything at all. I didn't really give it too much thought. That's normally how these sorts of situations go. I was really enjoying the ambiance as I was walking around. Since I had seen someone nearby this merry-go-round type thing, I decided to go over and check it out. This thing was really run down. The riding animals were all decayed and filthy looking. I also noticed something really unusual though. A couple of them had barbed wire wrapped around them. It was pretty obvious if you looked closely, so no one would be stupid enough to actually get on the ride and hurt themselves. It just seemed really weird though that anyone would wrap them up like that. As I continued around, I noticed a lot of weird things like this. Barbed wire here and there, a place where there were more tripwires set up. This time I was ready for it and didn't trip. All this did make me start to wonder though. Had someone been here before? Why were there all these booby traps around? There was one roller coaster in the park that wasn't really that big. There was still a train on the tracks, and it was trapped too. It was more subtle razor wire wrapped on the drop-down harness. It was odd, and I couldn't quite figure it out. I thought I heard some footsteps quickly running behind me. When I turned around, I could have sworn I saw someone dash behind one of the booths. I felt my anxiety go up when I saw that, wondering if that really was my imagination just getting the better of me. I cautiously approached the area I thought I saw the person run behind. I was really nervous. I was expecting someone to pop up and attack me. As I walked around the back though, I couldn't see anyone there. I was getting really nervous. I wanted to be freaked out, but when the freaking out actually happens, it can feel a little weird. In the moment, you wonder what's going on. Then, I noticed something else. There was a cigarette on the ground, and it appeared to still be smoking a little. My heart jumped in my chest when I saw that, because that indicated I truly was not alone here. Then I heard a noise. It was a human scream, but not like a pained scream. It was something else altogether. The kind of scream you'd make if you wanted to attack, rather than being attacked. I turned toward the sound and saw another person. They were crouched behind the train of the roller coaster. He was standing right where I had been standing before. It kind of made me wonder if he had been there the entire time. He didn't attempt to run away or anything. He just crouched down behind the train so only his eyes were above and looking at me. The look he was giving me was not something I really wanted to see. It was quite scary. It was a look that told me I was not welcome here. I heard a noise off to the side of me. When I looked over, I saw another person. They were both male and both very young. They were both shirtless, with tattoos covering their torsos, and were wearing cargo shorts. What got me the most was the look in their eyes. I decided I had to leave. I was scared though that even if I moved, they might come after me. All they were doing though was looking at me, and my eyes met theirs each time. I had a feeling these were not the only two people here. I started walking toward the entrance after. I kept looking back over my shoulder to see if they were still there. However, they hid themselves again. I heard that horrible scream once more. It terrified me. Like an idiot, I started running and forgot about the tripwire at the entrance. I tripped on it, and as I was falling, I put my hands out to break my fall. As luck would have it, my left hand landed right on the board with those nails, puncturing the palm of my hand. Fortunately, I was able to pull it out rather quickly. I left that park and got as far away from it as I could. I don't know what was going on there. It makes sense people might try to live in these old places. but the things that were going on there were just way too weird. It felt like I was in danger the whole time. I never went back, and I don't tell this story to many people. I thought it might work well to share here, though. This happened a couple of years ago, back when I was a dancer at a gentleman's club in Virginia. It was the most upscale place in the city, but it still more or less catered to the regular clientele. There was a man named George who used to come in and see me a couple of times every week. He would buy dances and VIP rooms and would always tip very well, while saying things like, "I can't believe you don't have a boyfriend," and "When are you gonna let me take you out to dinner?" The thing is, I did have a boyfriend. However, like my real name, my personal life is not anyone's business. Strip clubs are a fantasy environment. If these men knew I had a boyfriend and a life outside of dancing, they wouldn't be willing to pay nearly as much money as they did. One night I was getting dressed to leave, and I was excited to get home, as my boyfriend had just come back from a tour he was on. He's in a band, and he was waiting at home for me. The club closed at 2 a.m., so I usually walked out the door and to my car around 2:30 or so. Usually we have a bouncer that walks us out, but since it was a slow night, we only had one bouncer, who was still on the clock. He was off doing something else. I was in a real hurry to get home, so I just ran to my car all alone. As soon as I started up my car and turned out of the parking lot though, another car turned its lights on and pulled out right behind me. I didn't think too much of it at first and continued on my way home until I realized that every turn I made, that car followed exactly. They even followed me onto the highway and onto the same exit my boyfriend and I lived on. We lived on the outskirts of the city in a heavily wooded area where houses are pretty far and few between. So as soon as that car took the same exit down the gravel road that led to the area my house is in, I called my boyfriend. Now, my boyfriend was a really big guy and had a bad temper too. As soon as I pulled into our driveway with the other cars still behind me, he ran out from behind his tour van with a baseball bat in tow and two of our dogs following close behind. He told me to stay in my car while he tried to see who was following me. Of course, we found out it was George. My boyfriend managed to hit the hood of his car with the bat before George could reverse back down the gravel road and disappear. I was scared, of course, because now he knew where I lived, but my boyfriend assured me there was going to be nothing to worry about anymore. I had a feeling he would adequately deter George from ever coming back. I mean, I guess a huge tattooed guy with a baseball bat and two big dogs was a pretty good deterrent in itself. I told my managers at work about the incident the next day, and they banned George from the club. A couple of months later, he tried to come in anyway, but the bouncer stopped him. His only explanation was that he thought I didn't have a boyfriend.